So we support our full-time Flex and Flex Online MBA programs. Before I dig deep into the application workshop itself, I'll talk about the differences between those programs, just so you have a general understanding of what you could potentially be signing yourself up for. But you might notice that Catherine Chan is on this Zoom call as well, our Zoom meeting. So she's one of my colleagues on the operations team, on the MBA admissions team. So she's going to be helping out with Q&A during the session. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those into the Q&A box and she'll answer those as we go along. I'll be presenting for roughly 45 minutes, and then we'll save the last 10 or 15 minutes for any questions that Catherine wasn't able to get to, or that I can just talk out loud about if they're particularly nuanced or anything like that. But yeah, and then also we might have another colleague of ours just to observe as he might be doing these in the future. So just for him to shadow, but his name is Jonathan Crawford. So if you see somebody else hop on to into the Zoom meeting, then you'll know who that is. But yeah, before I start talking about the MBA application, I'll talk about the differences between the full-time Flex and Flex Online MBA programs, which are the programs that we support. So not to overcomplicate it, it's the same exact degree, same MBA degree, but just different formatting. With that said, the MBA application for all of these programs are very, very similar. There's some slight differences between a few of them, which I'll discuss in the application workshop. But by and large, it's all a very similar process in terms of the application process, the classes that you'll take, the resources that you'll have, like our Career Center, the types of projects you'll do, and the list goes on. So put simply, same degree, same application. And in terms of the degree formatting, it's just a little bit different between these three. So the full-time MBA program is our standard two-year, it's a standard two-year MBA where people will pause their careers for 2 years to become a full-time student. And then our Flex and Flex Online programs are our part-time versions of the MBA program. It's really tailored for those who are working professionals and want to take classes in the evenings on a part-time basis, generally taking 2 classes at a time, but you have a lot of flexibility in terms of how many classes that you take at a time. So as a result, you can complete the MBA degree anywhere from a little over 2 years to 5 years. So the Flex program is all on campus, similar to the full-time program where you're all in the Rafiq B. Hariri building, which is the home of the McDonough School of Business. And then our Flex Online program is similar in formatting to the Flex program in that it's part-time. However, all the classes and a lot of the activities are almost entirely online, with the exception of maybe a total of 3 weeks throughout the entirety of your program. Requires some in-person components. So I won't go into those details, but those are just the differences between those programs. And then last thing I'll mention is that each program starts in the fall of each year. So if you're looking to submit an application for a fall 2024 program start, I hope this application workshop is helpful for you. If you're looking to apply in a future admission cycle, let's say you're not ready to start the MBA program until fall 2025, a lot of what I'm going to be discussing is still going to be relevant and should be relevant this time next year. But yeah, everything I'm talking about today will be relevant for a fall 2024 program start. Okay, so the application workshop itself. So before I go into the holistic approach, I'll just point out that the green boxes that you see here are the very, very, very high level are the big application requirements that you'll be required to submit. So my advice for anyone, regardless if you're applying to the full-time MBA program, Flex or Flex Online MBA program at Georgetown, if you're considering a public policy degree at a completely different university, regardless of what program that you're applying to, my best advice is to start an application, skim through it, go through all the required fields, and just get a general sense of what is being asked of you and what you should expect to submit and what types of documentation that you'll need to find and submit, and game plan from there. Because like one of the last things that we want people to do is to go line by line through an application, which is like intuitively, that's something I would do. But then come to find out that the very last requirement is going to take you 3 days to complete, and the application deadline is in 1 day. So we want to make sure that you avoid that. On top of that, you get a really detailed understanding of what application requirements are needed. So for example, sub-requirements of requirements. to give you a very high level example, you'll be required to submit transcripts, which I'll talk about in a second. Your transcripts will need to ensure that they have every class that you attended, every grade that you earned, your name of your institution, your name, all these different sub requirements. So that's something that like a website, like a university website, won't necessarily provide. So going through the application itself will be something where you get a really detailed understanding of what's going to be required from you. So with that out of the way, in terms of the holistic review process, that's probably like the one thing that when someone, a prospective applicant or prospective student asks us, how do you review applications? And the reality is that we take a very holistic approach when we review these applications. It's not the answer that people want to hear all the time, and I totally understand. But the reality is that all of our applicants are coming from various different backgrounds, whether that's from different undergraduate institutions, different majors, different types of work experience, different amounts of work experience. Ultimately, there's no one size fits all in terms of the type of background that people are coming from when they're pursuing MBAs. That's kind of the beauty of the MBA as well, is that there's people coming from all of these different backgrounds from different countries, different academic backgrounds, etc., and coming into the program and all having various different career outcomes. I won't go into career outcomes today, but ultimately it's a very well-encompassing, well-rounded degree of people that are coming from various people coming from non-traditional backgrounds. So if you're coming from like a non-business or quantitative heavy background, my set of advice or words of wisdom for you is that you are less rare than you might think, but I mean that in a good way, or not in a negative way, because there's a lot of people that are coming from your quote unquote non-traditional backgrounds. So in terms of our approach to reviewing all applications, we try to break this down, or we do break this down into quantitative and qualitative measures. So first we'll talk about quantitative measures, and really what I'm going to key in on here are the quantitative indicators that we're looking for. And specifically with academic history, so your transcripts from schools that you've attended in the past, as well as test scores. So the stats that you see here on the left are comparable year over year. I've been with the team for about 7 years now, and this has been relatively consistent. And I should clarify that these are GPA numbers. I realize these slides aren't updated, so I apologize. But yeah, so these are average, or sorry, these are the middle 80% range of GPAs for those who earn their bachelor's degree from a U.S. school who also operated on a 4.0 scale, which is the majority of U.S. schools. Some exceptions are like Cornell operates on a 4.33 scale. I know Princeton doesn't provide GPAs, so schools like that are excluded from this range. And then year over year average GPA is about a 3.3. But the point being with this graphic is that it's a very wide range and we don't have a minimum GPA requirement. So if you have a very low GPA, for example, that's something you can't change anymore. So there's certainly other aspects of your application that can help offset that. For example, like a test score, which I'll talk about in a second. But in terms of what will be required for you in the application itself, so we will require that you submit all of your transcripts from your undergraduate level education and beyond. So we don't need any transcripts from high school. So a lot of times I see a bachelor's level degree transcript with AP credits from high school, for example, that transfer into their bachelor's level school. We don't need to see your transcripts from your high school for those AP credits. Now, what we will need to see is your classes and grades from every school that you've attended from your undergraduate level education and beyond. So that includes things like transfer credits from a community college or transfer credits from like a study abroad school. So the key thing here is that we need to see your letter grades that you've received. Ultimately, there's going to be a short questionnaire in the educational background section of the application, so you have a good understanding of which transcripts and which grade skills that you need to submit. But put simply, let's use study abroad as an example. You studied abroad for a semester, and in your bachelor's degree transcript, your study abroad classes appear. That's great. They show that you passed. That's also great. But the letter grade that's included just says CR or T or TR. Ultimately, those just stand for transfer and shows that you passed. Now, if you're ultimately we want to understand how you performed in these classes, because that will give us a better holistic view in terms of how you performed academically during your undergraduate career or undergraduate level education, and of course beyond. So if you're in a situation like that, then you need to reach out to your study abroad school to get your letter grades, to get your transcripts from that particular school and attach those to your application. So I'll stop there because it can get relatively nuanced because every school treats how they provide transfer credits differently and how they provide study abroad transcripts differently. But ultimately, there's a short questionnaire in the educational background section that should be helpful for you so you understand what transcripts and grade scales to submit. And I mentioned undergraduate level education and beyond. So that also includes any master's level coursework that you've done. So let's say that you are currently in a master's program or you completed a master's program in the past, you want to attach transcripts and grade scales for those schools as well. And then I mentioned earlier that in terms of reviewing the transcripts that you submit, like I mentioned, we don't have a GPA minimum. We understand that the GPA is something that you can't change anymore. So we certainly evaluate your final GPA in terms of evaluating you as an applicant, because that does give us an overall indication of how you performed during your academic history at a particular school. However, we're certainly going to look beyond the final GPA and review things like academic progression, for example, a common thing I've seen is we see that someone does really well, let's say in their freshman year of college, and then their sophomore year hits and their grades dip. But then their junior year and senior year, they go back to freshman year levels. So I don't want to, like, as an admissions committee member, I'm kind of left questioning, well, what happened in sophomore year? What your transcript's not going to tell us is any context that might be relevant to that time period. So that's where using something like an optional essay to explain any context that we should be aware of could be really, really useful. And this goes for any points of your application, doesn't necessarily just have to be with explaining any academic trends that you've had or academic history that you've had in the past. This could be for how you performed on a test or explaining a work app or whatever. But anyways, your transcript isn't going to tell me that like you had to work full time while you were in school, which negatively affected your grades, or that you may have gone through like some sort of medical condition and that took you out of class, which ultimately tanked your grades and ultimately affected your final GPA. So transcripts aren't going to tell us that information. So if you feel that there's any relevant information that you want to share that you weren't otherwise able to share in the application, definitely use the optional essay to explain that. You're more than welcome to share as much information as you feel comfortable sharing. But yeah, definitely use the optional essay to share all that. Test scores. So the numbers that you see here are from our most recent admission cycle. Same with the GPA numbers that I just showed. And these are comparable year over year from what I've seen, just to give you a general sense of averages. Average GPA or GMAT that we've gotten is typically around the 690, 700. Average GRE is typically around like a 320 or so. For the executive assessment, which I'll talk about in a second, our sample size is very, very low, simply because it's not the most commonly taken test. But generally speaking, for those who we have admitted, tend to score at a 150 total or above, kind of equating to at least getting a 10 on each section of the test. There's 3 sections. So that's something to consider. But anyways, I should have led with what test scores we require. I will talk about test waivers in a second. But we require the GMAT, GRE, or executive assessment. We don't have a preference over which test someone takes. Ultimately, take the test you feel most comfortable taking. On very rare occasions, we also do strictly for the Flex and Flex Online program. We accept the MCAT, LSAT, and PCAT if you've taken those in the past, but that's strictly for the Flex and Flex Online programs. But those, generally speaking, make up a very, very small percentage of the applicant pool. So if anyone has any particular questions about that and they have one of those test scores, feel free to enter that in the Q&A. We'd be happy to address those. But yeah, similar to the GPAs, we don't have a score minimum. But the point of the graphics, the numbers that you see here, is that we have a very wide range of scores. So similar to what I said about having a low GPA, Just because you have a low test score doesn't mean that you are going to be denied admission or anything like that. Now, it certainly works in one's favor to have a higher test score. The higher, the better, generally speaking. However, let's say you had a poor, you did poorly on a standardized test. You took the GMAT once and you didn't do particularly well. Things like a strong academic background, like you were in a quantitatively heavy bachelor's program and you performed well and you got like an above average GPA. That's something that can help offset that, because ultimately in the admissions committee, what we're looking for are things like academic indicators. So if I'm reviewing your application as a whole, let's say I'm looking at your test scores and your transcripts, I'm asking myself, am I setting this if I were to admit this person, am I setting this person up for success academically? And for lack of a better way of putting it, like an informal way of putting it, is am I going to be throwing this person into the deep end and making it a not pleasant experience for them academically, not a good experience for professors, support staff, etc. So those are things that are going through our heads when we are reviewing applications in general. But when it specifically comes to academics, we're looking at things like your test scores and how you performed academically in the past. So, but yeah, in terms of test waivers, so this is a common question that we get. We do offer test waivers. So the first, I'm going to send everyone a link just so you can review them on your own time or now if you'd like. So let me pull up the chat function. So everyone should get this. So this first link is to our full-time test waiver policy. So in short, it requires you to submit a test waiver application. And if you are granted a test waiver, then you can submit your full-time MBA application without a test. And if you're granted a waiver, we provide you specific instructions into how you go about that. And then the second link I'm going to provide you is for our Flex and Flex Online programs. So the second link is our test waiver policy for the Flex and Flex Online programs. A little bit different from the full-time program. So it does not require you to submit a test waiver application. However, in the MBA application, if you meet the test waiver criteria and choose to not submit a standardized test, then you'll be required to attest that you meet the test waiver criteria in the application itself. We've seen people that don't meet the test waiver criteria and the test that they do meet the criteria and don't submit a standardized test. I guess that's my way of saying if you do that, we'll notice. So so it's just something to be mindful of. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about test waivers or anything like that, feel free to enter those in the Q&A. We'd be happy to help answer any questions like that. Okay, and then last thing in terms of quantitative measures is we'll look at your years of work experience. But beyond that, we'll look at quality, which I'll talk about in a second. But first, I should define what years of work experience is, because this is an industry standard definition of what it is. So just to give you a little bit of context, when you're looking, for those who are interested in like MBA rankings and stuff, and you see like the Financial Times just released the top 100 MBA programs in the US for fall 2024. One of the criteria that they're using to create these rankings are things like years of work experience. So this is standardized across the country in terms of this definition. So what it is, it's all all full-time paid work experience after earning your bachelor's degree. So for those who might fall on like a more like quote unquote untraditional path, and you've earned full-time work experience before earning your bachelor's degree, unfortunately that work experience can't be counted towards this years of work experience number. However, that's why we require you to like submit a resume, which I'll talk about in a future slide. We're still going to evaluate that work experience that you've had prior to your bachelor's degree. It just can't be allotted towards this average years of work experience number. So that's just something to keep in mind. But ultimately, if you have work experience, full-time work experience before your bachelor's degree, don't see that as like a negative thing by any means. We're certainly still going to be reviewing it, and of course it has value. I think the most common example we see is anyone who may have like joined the military right out of high school and then earned their bachelor's degree, let's say on a part-time basis, 10 years after graduating from high school. So obviously we're going to be reviewing your work experience up until that point. So point being, nothing to be worried about, or to be like yeah, nothing to be worried about. So in terms of average years of work experience that we see year over year, it's about 5 years. That's not unique to Georgetown in any sort of way, but it's really the MBA, what the MBA market sees in general. Around the 5 year mark is when a lot of people are looking to make some sort of switch in their career, or they know that they want to earn an MBA to enhance the career that they're currently in. Now, we definitely still see a very wide range of students come into the program in terms of their years of work experience. We have people that have over 8, 10, 15 years of work experience in some cases. In some rare cases, we have people that have under 2 years work experience. And in a case like this, where you have less than 2 years of work experience, or you have maybe 8+, 10+ years of work experience, it might make sense for you to submit an optional essay just to explain why you are pursuing an MBA now, and why it makes sense for this point of your career, and maybe also add in why you might be considering an MBA over another degree. So for example, if you have like 10+ years of work experience, like maybe briefly describing why an MBA makes more sense for you, as opposed to, let's say, an executive MBA, which is typically tailored for those who have 10+ years of work experience. So ultimately, a big reason why we value the amount of work experience someone has is you're going to be relied upon. Well, first of all, in terms of recruiting, we want to make sure that when it comes to you getting like internships, full-time positions, this is something that employers will key in on, in terms of not only that you're pursuing an MBA and you should earn an MBA within however amount of time, but also look at your previous work experience and see how that translates into a job position that you're applying to. So that's one factor. Another thing is in terms of just classroom participation. So you're going to be required to do things like as simple as raise your hand to share a work experience that you've had in a classroom discussion for classroom participation points. And there could be points where you are using your real life work experiences and applying that into a case study or into a group project, or whatever the case may be. So ultimately, you're going to be pulling from your previous work experiences when it comes to contributing to the program, and it affects your grade. So, but yeah, we certainly value the quality of work experience that you've had as well. So, and that's something I'll talk about in a second when it comes to resumes. So we want for you to highlight things such as your career progression, any leadership responsibilities you've had in your resume. Not everyone is required to have like a certain level of leadership experience, but ultimately in the MBA program, there's going to be a lot of situations really natural to be put in a leadership position, whether you're leading a study group or you decide to become the president of the Student Government Association, and everything in between. So, and I realize I'm at the letter of recommendation slide, so I'm sorry, I went out of order. Here we go, resume. So yeah, resume. Try to keep it to one page if you can, 2 pages tops, I'd say. And then if there's anything that you can quantify, that's certainly helpful. So for example, if you are like, so a little context, when you're quantifying your accomplishments, it kind of helps the admissions committee understand the impact of your work in certain situations. So let's say, for example, you're in a sales role and you share that like in FY22, in fiscal year 2022, I sold X amount in these sales, and then that is a 40% increase from the previous fiscal year. So like showing that comparison year over year is something that can be helpful for us to help us understand the level of impact that you've had over your time at a particular organization, and as well as like individual successes and things like that. The big takeaway I want people to have in terms of the resume itself is when you are putting it together, make sure that it is very digestible for a neutral audience. So what I mean by that is that when your application is being reviewed in various phases of the application process, it's going to be looked at by various different people. So I'm in a higher education professional. I will be looking at your resume, but let's say you're invited for an interview, which I'll talk about in a second. let's say you're invited for an interview and you do the interview and you're interviewed by a current student who has an accounting background and no higher education background at all. And let's say you're an accounting professional and your resume has a lot of accounting jargon, industry jargon, acronyms, et cetera, et cetera. I might not be able to totally understand your resume, but your interviewer could understand it much better than I could. So point being is that we want to make sure that your resume, we want resumes to be digestible for people that are coming from various different industry backgrounds, because the inevitably, like, people from various different industry backgrounds are going to be reviewing your resume, and we want to make sure that you are I want to make sure that you are you're portraying your work experience uh, in a digestible way for everybody, if that makes sense. So happy to elaborate on that a little bit further, but make sure it's digestible for a neutral audience. It might be worth for you to like construct your resume and have a friend or a family member who doesn't come from your industry and ask, like, does this make sense to you? Do you have a general understanding of what I do by reviewing this? I've seen resumes where they list the organization name and they list all these like sales metrics and things like that, but I have no idea what they sold. So even adding like a brief description in terms of like what your organization does goes like a long way. Even if that is like as simple as like software provider or steel manufacturer, anything as simple as that goes a really long way in terms of understanding the type of work that you do. So make sure your resume is digestible for a neutral audience. So yeah, I skipped ahead to resume, so I apologize for that. But recommendation. So we require just one recommendation. So logistically, operationally, how this will work is in the application itself, you'll be required to submit a recommendation form, or sorry, you'll be required to fill out a recommendation section, and that where you enter in your recommender's name, email address, etc. That form will be emailed directly to them, and they'll need to complete that form to complete the recommendation requirement of your application. We understand that some recommenders, they prefer to submit a formal letter or a common letter of recommendation or something along the lines of that. They're more than welcome to do that. They can attach their letter or common letter of recommendation at the bottom of this recommendation form that's going to be emailed to them and that they'll be required to submit. They'll still need to complete all required fields of this form to submit the form, but to make things easier for them, they can simply answer some of these questions, which are a set of like multiple choice questions and open text questions or open text responses, and type in like see attachment if their letter or common letter recommendation clearly answers some of the questions that we're already asking. So we want to make things as simple as possible for them. Ultimately, there's going to be detailed instructions for them, which includes what I just mentioned. So that's just something to keep in mind if your recommender asks. So in terms of who you choose as your recommender, we strongly encourage that it comes from your current direct supervisor, simply because we want to get the most recent insights into how you are as a professional. So that could be like most recent accomplishments, daily tasks, attitude in the workplace, things like that. But we certainly understand that there are scenarios where using your current direct supervisor just makes no sense. Your current direct supervisor, you could have gotten a month ago, and you've only known this person for a month. So in that case, it might make sense for you to use your previous manager or supervisor. Another scenario could be you don't want your current supervisor or your current manager to know that you're pursuing an MBA, because that could affect your standing in your current organization and could affect potential advancement, et cetera, et cetera. So if using your current direct supervisor does not make sense for you, or you just don't feel comfortable using them, that's totally okay. We suggest that you submit an optional essay to explain your reasoning why you did not choose them as your recommender, and explain why you chose the recommender that you did. So generally speaking, your former manager would probably be a good go-to as another option. Sometimes mentors in some scenarios are a good option. But generally speaking, I think your first go-to would probably be a previous manager. So, so yeah, that's it for recommendation. Personal essays, I'll go through this pretty quick. So we have one required written essay. It's a max of 500 words. So not incredibly long. But ultimately, we will give you 3 essay topics, or sorry, 3 essay prompts, and you just have to reply to one of them. You don't need to go the extra mile and reply to all 3. You just need to pick one prompt and reply to it. But the long and the short of it is that you will be sharing your personal, experiences and how they would contribute into Georgetown. And then we also have a required video essay. It's only 1 minute long, and it's meant to share something or some things that are, or I should say some things. The prompt is here on the screen. So it's meant for you to share personal experiences, interests, etc. For us to learn something new about you. It's not meant to share things that are necessarily work or school related. Now, if you're like particularly passionate about school or work or whatever, by all means, go for it. But we want to learn more than what we already know. So like speak beyond your resume if you can. It's great. It's a great way for us to get to know you more on a personal level, as well as get new tidbits too. Get a better understanding of maybe why you want an MBA. Get a better understanding of how you value work-life balance and things of that nature. So the prompt is relatively open-ended, and that's on purpose because everyone has something different that they can share. And in terms of the video production itself, ultimately you're getting assessed on the content of what you're sharing as opposed to the production value. So do not feel the need to have to shell out like hundreds of dollars to hire a film crew to film your video. I've seen it done before, not many times it's happened, but it's really nice, but you don't have to do that. As long as we can hear and see you, and that's the most important thing, and there's not like a lot of distractions behind you. So there's nothing wrong with you setting up a computer, a camera, your iPhone, or whatever the case may be to record yourself. Have a blank white wall behind you or a brick wall, and you talk to the camera for a minute. That's all it really needs to be. Now you're more than welcome to be creative with it. We've seen people that have filmed, they talked about their love for cooking, and they had someone film them while they're cooking, and they talk about their interest of cooking and stuff. So like you can get creative with that and cook as you talk. Just as one example I've seen before, but yeah, ultimately you don't need to do anything like creatively elaborate with your video essay. It can be as simple as having your camera set up and having a blank background behind you, and you talk for a minute. So the interview. So we do have an interview in the application, or sorry, the admissions process. So not all applicants will interview. They're done on an invite basis only, and they go out on a rolling basis, which I'll discuss when I talk about application deadlines. So if you're invited to interview, you only need to interview once. The interviews are only 30 minutes long, and you could be interviewing with a current or former MBA staff member. You could be interviewing with an alumni of the program, or you could be interviewed by a current student. So yeah, we don't. Oh yeah, sorry. Modes of the interview. You can do them virtually. You can also do them on campus or in a city near you. So mostly just because of the timing of the years and all that, I'd say the majority of our interviews are done virtually. However, there are options for you to come to campus and interview during certain points of the year. Certain points of the year, we also do interview trips. So we've had the ability to go, or we've done interview trips to over to India, like New Delhi, Mumbai. We've done, I think every year we do interview trips to New York. We've done interview trips to Boston where we'll interview people in person. So yeah, those are options there. So in terms of a virtual versus in-person interview, we do not have a preference over which mode of interview that you conduct. Ultimately, do whatever is best for your schedule. We're human. We understand that. You have your personal schedules, work-life balance, etc. Where even if you're located in DC and you need to interview virtually, it's not going to be seen as a negative thing by any means. So we understand that everyone has their own schedules, and interviewing in person doesn't always might not make sense with their schedule. So in terms of the interview itself, beyond the modality and all of that, prepare like it's like any other job interview. Be yourself, and we want to learn more about you. So, and why an MBA and why Georgetown makes sense for you. All right, so hopefully you'll submit your application. So the question is now what happens? So what will happen is that your application will be processed for completion after you submit it. Basically what that means is that we will, when I say we, I mean our operations team, will review your application to ensure that it has all the required components needed to be reviewed by the admissions committee. So for example, one of those required components is your recommendation. Let's say that the operations team has processed your application and everything is submitted, and all of, like, for example, your transcripts have all the required sub-requirements and all of that, like your name of your school, grade scales, etc. But then they notice that your recommendation is missing. They'll notify you that your application is currently being held from being forwarded to the admissions committee, and then they'll provide you details in terms of what needs to be done. But ultimately, your recommender would need to submit your recommendation before your application could get forwarded to the admissions committee for review. So yeah, I'll go into a bit more, slightly more detail about that when I go over application deadlines. But so yeah, after that, you'll be notified if you are going to be interviewed for an interview, assuming that your application is now complete. And then you'll be notified of a decision on the decision notification date of the round that you that we are in. And again, I'll go over that in a few slides. So class profiles. In terms of so these numbers are from our class that just started in fall 2023. There's a lot of numbers to digest here, but I think the biggest thing I'll highlight is just the amount of people that enroll, so you get a general understanding of like the class sizes. So for the full-time program, we had 258 in the incoming class, and generally speaking, every full-time class is anywhere between 250 to like tops 280. We pushed 280 one year, and I was really pushing it in terms of like class size and stuff. We made it work, but yeah, it's anywhere between 250 280. And for the flex program, we had 105 enroll, and then this does not include our flex online cohort. So our flex online cohort was the very first class, that flex online class that ever existed. It was this fall. They're here now as of like last month. But we have 45 students join. So between the Flex and Flex Online programs, totaled 150 students. So in any given time for full-time, there are anywhere between 500, 600 students in the program enrolled. And then for Flex and Flex Online, it's going to vary simply because of the amount of time, the flexibility of time it can take to complete the degree, because everyone has their different speeds in terms of completing the degree. I'd say anywhere roughly 400-ish students between Flex and Flex Online at any given time. Finances. So what you see here are the tuition rates for the current academic year. So I'll get to Flex in a second, but for full-time, you are charged a flat fee per year. What's included in these fees are things like student health insurance, as well as like one like graduate activity fee. It's like literally $35 or something like that. Fees to like use the gyms, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, for full-time, the amount of courses that you take at a time is relatively the same across your time in the programs, and so you pay a flat fee. For the Flex program and Flex Online, the tuition rates are the same. The numbers that you see here are an incredibly high estimate, so I don't want that to freak people out. Ultimately, you're charged by the credit hour. For the current academic year, it's $2,390 per credit. And it is a 54 credit total. It takes 54 total credits to complete the MBA degree. So yeah, the estimate that you see here is under the assumption that you like max out the amount of classes that you take. It also accounts for like you taking the student health insurance, which is like a close to $4,000 value for the year. But most Flex students, as well as Flex Online students, opt out of the annual health insurance because they already get health insurance through their employer. So obviously, they're not going to pay for another set of health insurance. So that's money that they don't spend. So yeah, and in terms of short term, in terms of financing, when you apply to the program, you will automatically be considered for scholarship. So there's no additional scholarship applications or anything like that that you need to submit. So when you're being reviewed by the admissions committee, not only are you being considered for admission, but you're also being considered for scholarship. And then the organizations that you see here on the screen are just organizations that we partner with. So there are times where we will, award. I'll just use Forte as an example. We fund a scholarship for an incoming student with a Forte fellowship. So basically, what that means is that they get a scholarship funded by the university, but then they're also invited to join the Forte Foundation, where they are able to take part in their career development opportunities, their network at large. So rather than you just being part of the Georgetown network, you also have access to this greater network of Forte. That basically goes for all these other organizations that we partner with. But yeah, in terms of long-term ROI, I don't have a slide on this, but actually let me share this link with everybody just so you get a general idea of career outcomes as well as average salaries, average signing bonuses, and all that. So the link that you see there is for our employment report for the class that graduated in 2022. The class of 2023 data will likely be available in October and November. Year over year, that's generally when the new class data comes available. So, but yeah, this is from the class of 2022. Just so you can get a general sense of average salaries and average signing bonuses. For the class of 2022, average salary is about $138,000 per year. And then average signing bonus was about $36,000 signing bonus. So anyways, there's more in-depth details in that link that I just shared in the chat. But yeah, feel free to let us know if you have any questions about that. Okay, so application deadline. So I'm just gonna give you a scenario or two of how these work. I don't want to repeat myself too much. So our next application deadline coming up is on October 2nd. So if you want to receive your decision letter on December 7th, you will want to submit your application by October 2nd. So let's say, for example, you are interested in applying in round one. You'd submit your application by October 2nd. Starting on October 2nd or October 3rd, our operations team will begin processing applications to ensure that they're complete. If your application's incomplete in any sort of way, like your recommendation's missing, grade scale is missing, what else? Your video essay link doesn't work, whatever the case may be, we'll notify you. Ultimately, that does not mean that you're going to get moved to round two automatically or anything like that. Ultimately, we'll give you details on what needs to be submitted, and we don't have the deadlines, available on our website or anything like that. But ultimately, if your application is at risk of being moved to round two, then we will notify you of a specific date that you need to meet. But ultimately, you really want to ensure that you submit a complete application by October 2nd, because that could delay when you get your decision letter. So submit a complete application on October 2nd. Worth double checking your work before you submit it, having a friend or family member look through your application to see if there's anything that you might be missing. But yeah, anyways, so assuming your application is complete, your application will be reviewed between the time that it's processed and December 7th, which is the decision notification date. In that time, you could be invited for interview. So if you're invited for an interview in round one, you could be invited and interview really anytime between October 2nd and December 7th. There's no particular order that we go into either. So yeah, those invites go out on a rolling basis. So let's say, for example, there's three outcomes that could happen on December 7th. You could be denied, unfortunately. So unfortunately, that'd be at the end of the road there, and then we welcome you to reapply. you could be admitted, which is awesome. So that would require you to confirm your spot in the incoming class to submit a deposit by February 1st. I should add a tidbit here that we are looking to require a second deposit. So each of these deposits will be $2,000. So you're looking at $4,000 total in deposits going into to confirm your spot in the incoming class. That second deposit deadline is to be determined. It would likely be in the spring at the earliest, so like April at the very earliest for any of these rounds. So more to come on that, but I wanted to point that out. But basically, that first deposit will hold your spot in the incoming class, and then your second deposit would be submitted again at a later date. Both of those deposits would be they would be credited towards your first tuition bill. So ultimately, this isn't money that's like held up and then returned back or anything like that. You could think of it as paying, tuition, parts of tuition in advance, essentially. So that's what would happen if you're admitted. And then the third scenario is you're waitlisted. So if you're waitlisted, we'll give you a particular date in which you will need to confirm your spot on the waitlist. Probably a week after December 7th would be that deadline. And assuming that you confirm your spot on the waitlist, then you'll be reevaluated in round 2. And then basically everything that I just mentioned about round 1 would repeat itself in round 2. So you could get interviewed anytime between January 4th and March 18th. And then you'd get a decision letter again on March 18th, notifying you that you've been admitted, or we'd like to offer you a place to remain on the wait list, or that we're unable to provide you admission. So again, that process will repeat in rounds 3 and 4 as well. So also, one thing I forgot to mention about the decision notification date is that we provide decisions on these dates strictly. So we don't provide decisions on a rolling basis. So if you are a complete applicant in round 1, you will receive your decision letter on December 7th, no sooner, no later. Typically no later than 5 p.m. Eastern time on that day. And then the same thing goes for every other round. So if you apply by round 2, you get your decision letter no sooner, no later than March 18th. Of course, that's under the assumption that you submitted a complete application. So that is it from me. I want to open it up to questions. Here are some QR codes to say connect with us if you want to get connected with the student ambassador, our team, and the list goes on. But yeah, I can open up the Q&A box. And Catherine, thank you for answering so many. I see you've answered a lot. So yeah, I can get to some of these and answer some of these aloud. So I see a lot of questions regarding Wes Documents. So I'll just read the first one I see aloud. Should the Wes certified documents be submitted as part of the application, or can the official transcripts be uploaded for the application and later submitted the Wes documentation on admission? So I should clarify that we do not require Wes evaluations. They are certainly helpful, but they're not required. So for those who are unfamiliar of what Wes is, it's WES stands for World Educational Services. Essentially, they are a governing body / consultant firm. I don't know their exact title, but basically they take non-US transcripts. So let's say you did your bachelor's degree in Columbia, and your school in Columbia does not operate on a 4-point grading scale, GPA scale, which is pretty common across the United States. What Wes does is they'll take that Columbian transcript and convert it into a US equivalent. So it will show a US equivalent of they got an A or B plus or C minus in these particular classes. They'll also show what their overall performance equates to on a 4.0 GPA scale. So they could say that this person got a 3.5 GPA US equivalent, US equivalent GPA. So that is what Wes says. We do not require those, but they are certainly helpful. So ultimately, if your school has to be meet Wes standards, which is dependent on different schools, that's very nuanced depending on the school and whatnot. So if you're unsure whether your school meets Wes standards, for example, if you earned a 3-year bachelor's degree from an Indian institution, then that it could be worth emailing us directly and just to get some clarity to make sure that you're eligible to apply. But yeah, that can get very, very nuanced depending on the school. So I'll leave that. I'll leave that there. Is there any focus on the quantitative section of the test score as the MBA is quantitatively rigorous? So yeah, so every section of any test that you take is going to be reviewed, and we're going to apply a lot of value towards it. But certainly the quantitative section is an important section to do well on, because we are looking for academic indicators to ensure that we're setting you up for we're setting up this applicant who could be a potential student. We're setting them up for success. So so generally speaking, if you do well on the quantitative section of the test, let's say you are in like the 75th percentile and above, or above on the quantitative section of the GMAT exam, that gives us a lot of confidence in terms of how you can perform in the quantitative rigor of the program. Now, if you perform particularly poor in that section, let's say like you got like you're in the 20th percentile or something like that of the GMAT quantitative section, that's where we'll look at. That's why we'll look at other areas of your application, such as how you performed at your bachelor's degree school. What sorts of quantitative classes that they took? If they did, how well did they do? Like, can this performance offset, a poor quantitative GMAT score? So it's one data point of many is the big thing to keep in mind. It is a very important application component, but keep in mind it's one data point of many that we review. When sending test scores, is it best to send the high score or send all of your scores? Send all of your scores. We need to have the most holistic view of your academic background, which includes test scores. So generally speaking, when it comes to like, let's say you took like the GRE, your GRE score report will have all of your test date attempts. So we'll be able to see all of that. So so yeah, submit every test that you've taken. Particularly if you've taken let's say the GRE like more than once. So we see plenty of applicants that have taken it 2, 3, 4 times. So definitely not a requirement. You just need to take it once. But yeah, submit all of your scores. Does taking multiple tests impact the application? I mean, it can. Ultimately, it's not required. So let's say you did really poorly on the GMAT, all sections, and then you decide, you know what, this isn't the test for me. Let me try the GRE, and you do particularly well. Then that could be a scenario where like, submitting multiple tests makes an impact. Like it's clear that like you perform much better on one test versus another. Now, if you're like, you've taken the GMAT, GRE, and executive assessment, I don't know who would want to do that, but you do really, really well in all 3 tests. Like that's great. Like there's multiple academic indicators there that gives us as admissions committee members confidence that you'll perform well academically, particularly like academically in the program. So I guess the short answer to that is it depends, but it's something I wouldn't totally overthink too. We just require one test. So if you, generally speaking, in your application, if you feel that there's an area of your application that is particularly weighing it down, let's say like a well below average undergraduate GPA, like a 2.2 GPA, that's what, doing well on a standardized test can really help offset that. So this question's about AP courses. It says, my college transcript reflects credit by exam for AP courses I completed in high school. Since it just says credit, do you need to see the AP courses in lieu of a letter grade? So we don't need to see any transcripts from classes from high school, so including like AP, IB, etc. So if your bachelor's degree transcript shows that you got AP courses or you got, classes transferred in from high school, we don't need to see those transcripts. Where we do potentially need to see transcripts is if you during your bachelor's degree tenure, you earned other transfer credits, such as, you spent a year at a community college or um, you you did a semester abroad. If those like community college grades and classes and study abroad grades and classes are not included in your bachelor's degree transcript, then we'll need to see your transcript from that community college and that study abroad school. And not to like totally it get that requirement gets particularly nuanced because every school treats how they show transfer credits differently. But I'll reiterate that there is a questionnaire in the application itself in the educational background section that will hopefully help everyone in terms of understanding what transcripts from what schools that they need to submit. I see there's a portion of the application that requires you to list other programs that you're applying to. Could you clarify if it is required to report these other programs and why this information is asked? Great question. So yeah, you are welcome to share as much information as you would like. So ultimately, this gives us a general guide of like where you're looking to apply. We know that all of our applicants are applying to multiple programs. I'd say it's relatively rare to see. We see it every year, but there's some people that are dead set on only applying to one program. I'm sure various other MBA programs MBA admissions offices can say the same thing. But this just gives us a general understanding of like what you're looking for in terms of an MBA. So for example, we might see that someone is applying to the full-time MBA program, but every other program that they're applying to is an online program. So it's like, is Georgetown the only in-person institution you're looking at? And those are things that we could probe on, let's say like in an interview, for example, just to get a better understanding of like what experience you're looking for. So it's not going to be used in terms of like deciding whether we're going to admit someone or not, anything like that. It can help us guide conversation, essentially. Let's say if you're interviewed, and just to get a better understanding of like what type of MBA experience you're looking for. And I realize we're at time. I'm gonna try to answer like one more. There's a lot here. And I will end with this because I realize hold on one sec. I'm trying to prioritize which one I should be answering. Yeah, so visas for international students. So this question just asks if you could provide some information about the visa process for international applicants. Let me go back to this slide here. So to make a very long story short, if you are a applicant who would require a visa, more than likely an F1 visa, which is a student visa, to attend any MBA program in the US, apply by round 2 simply because of visa implications. So if you're deciding on, this goes for anybody actually, regardless of if you need a visa or not. If you're unsure about what round to apply in, our simple advice is to apply when you're ready. We want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward in terms of we want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward when you apply. We don't want you to like rush an application in because you want to get a decision by December 7th and you submit your application on a whim on October 2nd, and it's almost seen as like a formality on our end. So we want to avoid that. We want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward. However, having said that, for international applicants specifically who would require a visa to attend the program, we encourage you to apply by round 2 simply because of visa timelines. We've absolutely had applicants that have applied and been admitted in rounds 3 and 4 of international applicants that have applied and have been admitted in rounds 3 and 4, but they just have a much shorter window of time and less room for error to obtain a visa in time to start the program, which is in August of each year. So I'll end it there. So thank you all very much for coming and for attending. If you have any questions for us, feel free to connect with us here and we'd be happy to help. So thank you all again for your time and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.